I wiped sweat from my forehead as our Humvee rolled to a stop at the edge of the village. The vehicle's frame ticked and pinged as the engine cooled in the brutal afternoon heat. Our mission brief had been straightforward: clear and secure a small Iraqi settlement roughly 20 miles from our forward operating base. Intelligence suggested the place had been abandoned for at least 2 weeks. Locals apparently fled due to insurgent threats. "Thompson, get your team moving. I want this place secured before sundown," Lieutenant Morris called from the command vehicle. I nodded and gathered my squad. James Mitchell checked his rifle and adjusted his helmet, ready to take point as usual. Robert Parker and Christopher Hayes would cover our flanks, while Ryan Sanderson, our youngest, would guard our rear. Standard formation for an urban sweep. "Keep your eyes open," I told them. "Intel says this place is empty, but we're not taking chances." We moved in formation down the main dirt road that cut through the center of the village. Mud brick houses with flat roofs lined both sides, their windows dark and empty. The place looked like dozens of other abandoned settlements we'd cleared before, yet something felt off from the start. "Where's all the stuff?" Ryan asked quietly from behind me. It was a good question. When people flee their homes, they leave things behind. Clothes too bulky to carry, kitchen items, furniture, toys. This place looked almost swept clean. "No animals either," James added from up front, his voice low and controlled. "No birds, no dogs, not even tracks." We approached the first house, a single-story structure with a wooden door hanging slightly open. James and I took positions on either side while Robert and Christopher covered the windows. "Going in," James announced, pushing the door with his rifle barrel. The interior was dark, the thick walls keeping out the worst of the desert heat. James entered first, weapon raised, with me right behind him. The front room contained only a small table and 3 chairs, all pushed against the far wall. Nothing unusual, except for how clean everything looked. No personal items, no scattered belongings. "Kitchen clear," James called from the next room. I moved to join him, Ryan and the others following behind. When I stepped into the kitchen, James was standing motionless, staring down at the wooden table in the center of the room. "What the hell?" he muttered. The tabletop was covered with human teeth, hundreds of them, scattered across the surface like someone had dumped them from a bag. Molars, incisors, canines, all adult teeth in various conditions. Some yellowed with age, others stained with what looked like tobacco, a few surprisingly white and clean. "Sir, you need to see this," Robert called from another room. I tore my eyes away from the table and followed his voice to what appeared to be a bedroom. Robert stood in the doorway, his rifle lowered slightly as he stared at a small child's bed. The entire surface of the mattress was covered with teeth, not scattered like in the kitchen, but laid out carefully, side by side, filling every inch of the bedspread. "What the fuck is this?" Christopher whispered behind me. "Bathroom's the same," Ryan reported, his voice tight. "The sink is full of them. Some still have blood on the roots." I'd been deployed 3 times before this tour. I'd seen roadside bomb aftermath, mass graves outside Fallujah, the results of sectarian violence that defied explanation. But this was different. This felt wrong in a way that made the hairs on my neck stand up. "We need to check the other houses," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "Same formation. Stay alert." We moved back outside, the sunlight almost a relief after what we'd found. The village consisted of roughly 30 structures spread across 4 dirt streets. We approached the next house with even more caution, though I wasn't sure what we were expecting to find, or what we were afraid of finding. The second house contained the same disturbing collection. Teeth scattered across tables, piled in corners, filling drawers that had been left open. "It's like someone pulled every tooth from every mouth in the village," James said quietly as we exited. "And then sorted them," Christopher added. "Look at this." He pointed to a small side table where teeth had been arranged by type, molars in one pile, incisors in another. The third house was the same, and the fourth. Each building we entered contained thousands of human teeth, some arranged in patterns, others scattered randomly throughout the rooms. No blood spatter, no signs of struggle, just teeth, hundreds of thousands of teeth. "Could this be some kind of cultural thing we don't know about?" Ryan asked, his voice strained as we regrouped outside the fifth house. "No," I said firmly. "This isn't any cultural practice. This is something else." By the sixth house, we'd established a grim pattern. Every residence contained the same disturbing collection. No bodies, no signs of violence beyond the obvious horror of what must have happened to the people who lived here. Just teeth, meticulously gathered and distributed throughout the homes. "Sir, should we call this in?" James asked as we stood in the street, all of us visibly unsettled despite our training. I nodded and reached for my radio. "Base, this is Echo 6. We've got an unusual situation here." The response was immediate. "Echo 6, report. Village appears abandoned as expected, but we found evidence of..." I paused, trying to find the right words. "We found large quantities of human teeth in every building searched so far. No bodies, no blood, just teeth." There was a long pause before the radio crackled again. "Echo 6, continue your sweep. Document everything. Command is sending additional personnel to your location." "Copy that," I responded, then turned to my team. "We keep going. Check every building." As we moved toward the seventh house, I caught Ryan looking back over his shoulder at the empty street behind us. "You see something?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, just felt like... Never mind." I knew what he meant. It felt like we were being watched, though there was clearly no one here but us. "Stay focused," I told him, though I found myself scanning the empty windows of the houses we'd already cleared. We continued our sweep methodically, house by house. Each one contained the same grotesque collection. In one home, we found teeth arranged in concentric circles on the floor. In another, they filled every cooking pot and water container. "How many people would it take to get this many teeth?" Christopher asked as we exited the 10th house. "Too many," I replied. "More than lived in this village." By the time we'd checked the 12th house, the sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the empty streets. I'd seen combat zones, mass graves, and war crimes during my years of service. I'd witnessed the aftermath of hatred and violence that most civilians couldn't imagine. But this systematic arrangement of teeth felt different, purposeful, and deeply wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. I wiped dust from my face and took a swig from my canteen. The water was warm and tasted like plastic, but it helped clear the dryness from my throat. "Let's hit the eastern section before we lose daylight," I told the team. We moved in formation down the main street, our boots crunching on the hard-packed dirt. The lengthening shadows made the empty doorways and windows look like black voids. Despite the heat, I felt a chill run down my back. Christopher suddenly raised his fist, the signal to stop. We froze in position, weapons ready. "I heard something," he whispered, nodding toward a small house at the edge of the village. "Movement inside." James looked at me, his expression questioning but ready. After hours of empty houses and teeth, the possibility of finding an actual person sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. "Standard breach and clear," I said quietly. "James, take the left side of the door. Ryan, with me. Robert and Christopher, cover the rear exit." Robert and Christopher moved around the building while James took position beside the partially open front door. I could hear it now too, a soft, rhythmic shuffling sound coming from inside. Not footsteps, but something being moved repeatedly. I held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. James pushed the door wider with his rifle barrel while I entered in a crouch, weapon raised. Ryan followed close behind me. The interior was dim, lit only by the fading sunlight filtering through a small window. When my eyes adjusted, I saw her, a middle-aged woman sitting at a wooden table in what appeared to be a kitchen area. She was hunched over, her hands moving methodically across the tabletop. "Clear the rest," I whispered to Ryan, who nodded and moved to check the adjacent rooms. I approached the woman cautiously, my rifle trained on her center mass. "Ma'am, can you understand me?" I called out in English, then tried the few Arabic phrases I knew. She didn't look up or acknowledge my presence. As I drew closer, I saw what her hands were doing. She was sorting teeth. A large pile sat in front of her, and her fingers moved with mechanical precision, picking up each tooth, examining it briefly, then placing it in one of several smaller organized piles. "House is clear," Ryan reported as he returned. "Just her." I studied the woman more carefully. Her hair was long and dark with streaks of gray, hanging in unwashed strands around her gaunt face. Her skin was deeply tanned, her cheeks hollow. She wore simple clothing typical of the region, a long dress and headscarf, both covered in dust. What struck me most were her eyes, completely vacant, as if looking through the teeth rather than at them. "What's your name?" I tried again. "Do you speak English? Hal tatakalam al-Inglazia?" No response. Her hands never stopped moving, picking up teeth, sorting them, placing them down. "Thompson," Ryan said quietly, gesturing to the woman's left hand. That's when I noticed she was clutching something. A small metal box, no larger than a paperback book, was gripped tightly in her left hand, while her right continued sorting. The box looked ancient, made of some tarnished metal with intricate symbols carved into its surface, symbols I'd never seen before, neither Arabic nor English, nor any language I recognized. "Ma'am, we're American soldiers," I said, lowering my weapon slightly. "We're here to help. Can you tell us what happened here?" Still nothing. Her blank eyes remained fixed on her task. I moved to the doorway and signaled to James. "We've got a civilian, female, mid-40s. She's alive but non-responsive." He nodded and spoke into his radio, informing command of our discovery. When I turned back, Ryan had moved closer to the woman. His young face showed a mix of caution and curiosity as he studied the box in her hand. "Look at those markings," he said. "They're not wearing off. They're carved in." I noticed her fingernails were caked with dried blood and dirt. The sight made my stomach tighten. Whatever had happened in this village, this woman had been part of it. "Ryan, back up," I ordered. "Let's not get too close until we know more." But Ryan had already reached toward the box. "I just want to see what—" The woman's grip tightened instantly when Ryan's fingers touched the metal surface. Her knuckles went white, but her eyes never shifted from the teeth she was sorting. "Ryan, I said back up," I repeated more firmly. Her hand— "It's like a vice," he said, trying to pry her fingers from the box. "But the rest of her isn't reacting at all." I holstered my sidearm and moved to the woman's side. Up close, I could smell her. Dust, sweat, and something else. Something metallic and unpleasant. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us," I said, placing my hands gently but firmly on her shoulders. "We need to get you medical attention." She felt light under my grip, almost fragile, but there was a strange tension in her muscles, like steel cables beneath her skin. Her focus remained absolute, her right hand continuing to sort teeth even as I held her shoulders. "Help me get the box," Ryan said, still struggling with her left hand. I shot him a warning look, but nodded. Whatever that box was, it might contain information about what happened here. "On 3, I said. 1, 2, 3. Ryan pulled at her fingers while I kept her shoulders steady. For a moment, nothing happened. Her grip remained impossibly strong. Then suddenly, her fingers released, and Ryan stumbled back with the box in his hands. The change in the woman was immediate and disturbing. The moment the box left her possession, her entire body went limp beneath my hands. The tension drained away, and her right hand stopped mid-motion, a tooth pinched between her fingers. "Thompson," James called from the doorway. "Command wants us to secure the civilian and continue searching the village. Backup's on the way." I nodded, but my attention was fixed on the woman. Though her body had gone slack, something about her felt wrong. It wasn't like she had relaxed or surrendered. It was as if something vital had left her. Ryan examined the box, turning it over in his hands. These symbols, I've never seen anything like them. He ran his thumb over the intricate patterns carved into the metal surface. There's a small latch here on the side. Don't open it, I said sharply. We wait for command to arrive. This is evidence. The woman's head had drooped forward, her hair falling across her face. I carefully tilted her chin up to check her eyes. They remained open but seemed even emptier than before, if that were possible. I think her name's Elena Rodriguez, Ryan said, pointing to a small identification card that had fallen from her pocket onto the floor. At least that's what this says. Looks like a local work permit. I picked up the card. The photo matched the woman, though in the picture she looked healthier, with alert eyes and fuller cheeks. Elena, Ms. Rodriguez, can you hear me? I tried again. No response. She remained completely still, except for the shallow rise and fall of her chest as she breathed. James appeared in the doorway again. Robert and Christopher are securing the perimeter. No sign of anyone else. I looked back at Elena Rodriguez, sitting limply at the table covered with human teeth, and then at the metal box in Ryan's hands. A deep certainty settled in my gut. This woman was the key to understanding what had happened to this village and its missing population. Whatever horror had occurred here, she had either witnessed it or been part of it. The metal box gleamed dully in the last rays of sunlight coming through the window. Those strange symbols seemed to shift slightly in the changing light, creating an unsettling impression of movement. Secure that box, I told Ryan. Don't open it. Don't drop it. When backup arrives, we'll hand it over with full documentation. Ryan nodded, but I could see the curiosity in his eyes as he studied the ancient-looking container. I understood his fascination. After hours of finding nothing but teeth, we finally had something concrete, something that might explain the inexplicable. I turned my attention back to Elena Rodriguez, whose vacant eyes reflected nothing of the horror surrounding her. Whatever she knew was locked away, either in her mind or in that mysterious box. Either way, I intended to find out. Ryan continued studying the box in his hands, completely absorbed by the strange symbols carved into its surface. I kept my attention on Elena Rodriguez, whose body had gone unnaturally slack beneath my grip. Her breathing remained shallow but steady, her vacant eyes fixed on nothing. We should secure her until the medical team arrives, I said, glancing around for something to restrain her with. The woman seemed harmless in her current state, but after what we'd seen in this village, I wasn't taking chances. James appeared in the doorway again. Thompson, command says they're sending a chopper with a medical team. ETA 40 minutes. I nodded, still supporting Elena's limp form. Did they give any specific instructions about the civilian? Just keep her secured and document everything, James replied, his eyes drifting to the table covered with teeth, then to the box in Ryan's hands. Ryan had turned the metal container over, running his fingers along the edges. The craftsmanship is incredible, he murmured. These symbols, they almost look like they're moving when you don't look directly at them. Ryan, I said sharply, put that down and help me with her. He didn't seem to hear me. His focus remained fixed on the box as his thumb traced a small protrusion on one side. I think I found something. Looks like a latch or a release mechanism. I told you not to mess with it, I said, more firmly this time. We wait for command. That's an order. Ryan looked up at me, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen before, a fascination that bordered on obsession. Don't you want to know what's inside, after everything we've seen today? Don't you want answers? Before I could respond, his thumb pressed down on the latch. There was a soft click as the ancient mechanism released. Ryan, stop, I called out, but it was too late. He lifted the lid of the box, and I watched as every drop of color drained from his face. His eyes widened, pupils dilating until they nearly swallowed the iris. For one terrible second, he made no sound at all, just stared into the open container with an expression of complete horror. Then he began to scream. It wasn't the kind of scream I'd heard from wounded soldiers or civilians caught in crossfire. This was something primal, a sound of pure terror that made my blood run cold. The box tumbled from his hands, clattering to the floor but remaining open. Ryan stumbled backward, clutching his head. "The eyes! They're hungry! So hungry!" His screams dissolved into incoherent babbling, words tumbling out between ragged breaths. "It sees everything. It's not supposed to be. Can't be. Please make it stop." James rushed into the room, weapon raised, scanning for threats. "What happened?" I left Elena propped in her chair and moved toward Ryan, who had backed himself into a corner. He was shaking violently, tears streaming down his face as he continued to mutter about eyes and hunger and darkness. "He opened the box," I said, gesturing to where it lay on the dirt floor. Something inside triggered this reaction. James kept his distance from the box, his training evident in his caution. "Should we close it?" I knew I should. Every instinct, every ounce of training told me to shut that box without looking inside. But something else pulled at me, the need to understand what could reduce a trained soldier to a trembling wreck in seconds. "Cover me," I told James, and approached the fallen container. The box lay open on its side, a small hinged lid fully extended. From my angle, I couldn't yet see its contents. I knelt down, hesitated for a heartbeat, then tilted the box toward me. What I saw defied explanation. Inside was something that seemed to move and pulse while remaining perfectly still. It was both there and not there, existing in a way that hurt to perceive. Colors that had no names shifted across shapes that couldn't exist in 3 dimensions. The wrongness of it hit me like a physical blow, making my vision blur and my stomach lurch. I jerked back, nearly losing my balance as a wave of nausea washed over me. The impossible geometry inside the box seemed to reach for me without moving, to whisper without sound. I felt a pressure building behind my eyes, as if my brain was physically rejecting what it was seeing. A sudden movement caught my attention. Elena Rodriguez, who had been completely limp moments before, bolted upright with such force that her chair toppled backward. Her movements were fluid yet wrong, too quick, too precise for human muscles and joints. "Stop her!" I shouted, struggling to my feet as Elena darted toward the door. James tried to block her path, but she moved with impossible agility, ducking under his outstretched arm. Christopher appeared in the doorway just as she reached it, and he lunged to grab her. She twisted away from him with unnatural speed, her vacant eyes never changing expression as she evaded their attempts to stop her. Within seconds, she had disappeared into the growing darkness outside. "After her," I ordered, but my voice lacked its usual command. The image from the box lingered in my mind, making it hard to think clearly. James hesitated, looking back at Ryan, who had slid down the wall to sit on the floor. His screams had given way to a hoarse whimpering that grew quieter with each passing second. "Sir, Sanderson needs medical attention," James said, "and the woman is heading into open desert in near darkness." He was right. Protocol dictated we secure the most immediate threat, and right now, that was whatever had affected Ryan and possibly me. "Christopher, Robert," I called out. "Secure the perimeter. If you see the woman, report but do not approach without backup." I turned my attention back to Ryan, whose whimpering had stopped entirely. He sat motionless in the corner, eyes wide and unblinking, his face locked in an expression of horror. I approached him carefully, speaking his name, but got no response. His breathing was rapid and shallow, his pupils still fully dilated. "He's in shock," I told James. "Radio command. Tell them we need that medical evac now. Priority 1. As James made the call, I forced myself to look at the box again. I needed to close it to contain whatever was inside. Steeling myself, I approached it cautiously, careful not to look directly at its contents. Using the barrel of my rifle, I nudged the lid until it closed with an unnaturally heavy thud. With the box shut, I felt some of the pressure in my head subside, but the images remained. Whatever I had seen was now burned into my memory, impossible to fully comprehend, yet impossible to forget. I picked up the closed box with my gloved hand and placed it on the table, away from the scattered teeth. My hands were shaking, and I took several deep breaths to steady myself. "Medical team is inbound," James reported. "ETA 20 minutes. They're sending additional security as well." I nodded, my mind racing as I tried to process what had just happened. We had been trained for combat, for insurgents, for IEDs and ambushes. Nothing in my 10 years of military service had prepared me for this. For teeth collected by the thousands, for a woman who moved like no human should move, for the contents of that ancient box. "No one touches this," I said, pointing to the closed container. "No one opens it again. When command arrives, we turn it over with full documentation." James nodded, his usual stoic expression now tinged with obvious concern, both for Ryan and, I suspected, for me. I must have looked shaken. I checked Ryan again, but his condition hadn't changed. He remained completely unresponsive, staring at nothing, trapped in whatever horror the box had shown him. Standing in that small room with its piles of teeth and its air of wrongness, I knew with absolute certainty that we had stumbled onto something far beyond military protocol. Something that shouldn't exist in our world of rules and orders and rational explanations. I pressed the button on my radio, keeping my voice as steady as possible despite the chaos around me. "This is Sergeant Thompson, requesting immediate medical evacuation. We have a soldier down with severe psychological trauma. Need medical support ASAP. Over." The radio crackled. "Copy that, Thompson. Medical chopper inbound. ETA 30 minutes. Over." "Copy. We'll prepare landing zone. Over and out." I released the button and turned to James. "Get the LZ ready. Use the clearing at the village center." James nodded and headed out, already calling to Christopher and Robert to help prepare the landing area. I knelt beside Ryan, who hadn't moved or spoken since his initial screams. His eyes remained fixed and dilated, his breathing shallow and rapid. Whatever he had seen inside that box had broken something inside him. "Ryan," I said quietly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Help is coming. Stay with me, soldier." He gave no indication he heard me. His skin felt clammy under my touch, and a thin sheen of sweat covered his forehead. I checked his pulse, racing but steady. The technical term was catatonic, I thought, though nothing about this situation felt like anything I'd been trained for. I kept one eye on the closed box sitting on the table. Even with the lid shut, I felt a strange aversion to looking directly at it. The memory of what I'd glimpsed inside lingered at the edges of my vision, like an afterimage that wouldn't fade. The wait for the chopper stretched into what felt like hours, though my watch told me only 22 minutes had passed. I stayed with Ryan, occasionally talking to him, though he showed no response. Outside, I heard the others clearing debris from the landing zone and setting up signal lights as darkness settled fully over the village. When I finally heard the distant thump of rotor blades, relief washed over me. The sound grew louder until it became a steady beat overhead, accompanied by the whine of the engines and the blast of disturbed air. "They're here," I told Ryan, squeezing his shoulder. "We're getting you help." The medical team arrived quickly, 2 medics carrying a stretcher and equipment bags. They moved with practiced efficiency, kneeling beside Ryan and checking his vitals while I explained what happened. "He opened a container and had an immediate psychological reaction," I said, keeping my explanation vague, yet truthful. "Screaming, followed by this unresponsive state. It's been about 45 minutes now." The lead medic, a stocky man with a close-cropped beard and the name Martinez on his uniform, shined a penlight into Ryan's eyes, checking pupil response. "Any drugs or substances involved?" he asked, not looking up from his examination. "No," I replied. "Just exposure to an unknown object." Martinez glanced at me, then back to Ryan. "We'll need to take him back for full evaluation. Help us get him on the stretcher." I assisted as they lifted Ryan, who remained rigid and unresponsive. His eyes stayed open, fixed on nothing, as we strapped him securely to the stretcher. The whole time, not a sound escaped his lips. As they prepared to move him out, I retrieved the metal box from the table, making sure it remained closed. I approached Martinez, who was checking Ryan's restraints one last time. "This needs to go with him," I said, holding out the box. "It's evidence of what caused his condition." Martinez looked at the box, then extended his hand to take it. The moment his fingers touched the metal surface, his face changed. All color drained from his cheeks, and his hand jerked back as if burned. "What the hell is that thing?" he asked, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "That's what we need to find out," I answered. "But it needs to go with Ryan. It's connected to his condition." Martinez hesitated, then pulled a medical containment bag from his kit, the kind used for hazardous or contaminated materials. He held it open without touching the box again. "Put it in here," he instructed. "Don't open it." I carefully placed the box into the bag, which Martinez sealed with gloved hands before placing it in a hard-sided case with biohazard markings. The caution seemed appropriate, even if the threat wasn't biological. "We'll take good care of your man," Martinez assured me as they lifted the stretcher. "You have orders?" "We're to secure the village until further notice," I replied. "Another team is on the way." Martinez nodded. "Good luck with whatever this is." I watched as they carried Ryan out into the night, the stretcher bobbing slightly as they moved toward the waiting helicopter. The rotors never stopped turning, creating a constant backdrop of mechanical noise that felt strangely comforting in its normality. After the chopper lifted off, its lights receding into the darkness, I rejoined my remaining team members. James, Christopher, and Robert gathered around me, their faces showing a mixture of concern and unease. "Orders are to secure the village until a specialized team arrives," I informed them. "We maintain the perimeter and document everything we find, but touch nothing." "What about the woman?" Christopher asked. "Elena Rodriguez? Keep an eye out, but do not approach if you spot her. Report immediately." We set up a rotation for guard duty and patrols. The village wasn't large, but the darkness and what we'd discovered made the task feel more daunting than it should have. I took first watch with James, while Robert and Christopher got some rest. As James and I patrolled the perimeter, the night seemed to press in around us. The desert beyond the village was a vast emptiness under the stars, but I couldn't shake the feeling we weren't alone. "You think Ryan will be okay?" James asked, breaking the silence. "I don't know," I admitted. "I've never seen anything like that reaction before." "What was in that box?" I considered how to answer. How could I describe something that defied description, something that seemed to exist in ways that violated reality itself? "I don't know that either," I said finally. "But whatever it wasn't natural." James nodded, accepting my non-answer. We continued our patrol in silence. Around 2 a.m, I heard it for the first time. A soft, rhythmic sound, like footsteps on gravel coming from somewhere beyond the village edge. I signaled to James, who nodded, indicating he heard it too. We moved cautiously toward the source, our weapons ready. The sound stopped abruptly. We waited, listening intently, but heard nothing but the light desert wind. After several minutes, we continued our patrol. An hour later, the sound returned, this time closer, from between 2 houses we had already searched. It wasn't quite footsteps anymore, but something being sorted or sifted, like fingers running through small, hard objects. "Thompson," James whispered, pointing toward a shadow moving between buildings about 50 yards away. I nodded and gestured for him to circle around while I approached from the front. We moved silently, using the darkness for cover. As I neared the location, the sorting sound grew clearer, a distinctive clicking of small, hard objects being moved against each other. When I rounded the corner, I found only an empty space between 2 mud brick walls. The sound had stopped again. James appeared from the other side, shaking his head. No one was there. "I saw something," he insisted quietly. "A figure moving right here." We searched the area carefully, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. In a small alcove formed by the joining walls, we found a fresh pile of teeth. dozens of them arranged in a perfect circle that hadn't been there during our earlier search. "Let's get back to the others," I said, the uneasiness growing stronger. Throughout the night, the pattern continued. Sounds that stopped when we investigated. Glimpses of movement that revealed nothing but more teeth when we checked. By the time dawn approached, all four of us had experienced it. The feeling of being watched, the sounds just at the edge of hearing, the movement just beyond our vision. With the first light of morning came the convoy. 3 black SUVs and 2 unmarked military vehicles rolled into the village, kicking up dust as they came to a stop in the central area. Men in civilian clothes emerged, 8 of them, moving with military precision despite their lack of uniforms. A tall man with gray hair approached me directly. He wore khaki pants and a button-down shirt that might have passed for casual, if not for the way he carried himself, straight-backed and authoritative. "Sergeant Thompson?" he asked, though it didn't sound like a question. "Yes, sir," I responded automatically, noting he knew my name, though I'd never seen him before. "I'll need your full report. Meanwhile, my team will take over here." He handed me a document with official seals. "These are your new orders. Your team is to return to base immediately for debriefing." I skimmed the paper, which was light on details but heavy on authority, bearing signatures from command levels well above my pay grade. "Sir, may I ask what agency you're with?" I ventured. His expression remained neutral. "That's not relevant to your orders, Sergeant." He gestured to 2 of his men, who approached carrying cases. "We'll need all documentation of this location. Photos, notes, personal observations, all communication devices as well." Over the next 30 minutes, they systematically collected everything: our cameras, phones, notepads, even sketches Christopher had made of the tooth arrangements. They interviewed each of us separately, recording our statements with professional detachment. Their questions were precise, focused on what we had seen, what we had touched, and especially the metal box and Elena Rodriguez. When I mentioned the box and what happened when Ryan opened it, the man interviewing me showed the first crack in his professional demeanor, a slight tightening around his eyes, a barely perceptible tension in his shoulders. "You looked inside this box as well?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Briefly," I admitted, "just for a moment." "And what did you see?" I tried to form the words to describe it, but nothing seemed adequate. It was wrong, like seeing something that shouldn't exist, colors and shapes that don't make sense. He nodded as if this confirmed something, then moved on to questions about Elena and her escape. By mid-morning, they had effectively taken control of the entire village. Yellow tape cordoned off buildings, and teams in protective gear moved methodically from house to house, collecting and cataloging the teeth. "Your transport is ready, Sergeant," the gray-haired man informed me after the interviews were complete. "You and your team are to report directly to Colonel Anderson upon arrival at base. Speak of this to no one else." A helicopter waited at the same clearing where Ryan had been evacuated the night before. As we boarded, I noticed a hard-sided case being loaded carefully into a separate compartment, similar to the one the medic had used for the box, but larger. The flight back to base was mostly silent. My team looked exhausted, their faces showing the strain of what we'd experienced. I caught the pilot glancing repeatedly over his shoulder at the storage compartment where the case had been secured. Each time he looked, his expression tightened, and he would quickly turn back to his controls. About halfway through the flight, I noticed him reach up and adjust the small religious medal hanging from a chain around his neck, a nervous gesture he repeated several times during the journey. Whatever was in that case, whether it was the original box or teeth or something else from the village, he knew something about it, and it frightened him. As the base came into view below us, I wondered what explanation would be offered for what we had witnessed. Standard military procedure had no category for villages full of teeth, women who moved like no human should move, or boxes containing things that broke men's minds. One thing was certain: the official story would bear little resemblance to the truth. 18 hours after our helicopter touched down at base, I still hadn't slept. My body ached for rest, but each time I closed my eyes, I saw what had been inside that box. Shapes that shouldn't exist, colors that had no names. I lay on my bunk staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of the base around me. The debriefing with Colonel Anderson hadn't happened immediately upon our return as expected. Instead, we'd been told to clean up, get food, and wait for further instructions. The delay felt wrong. Military protocol meant swift debriefings after unusual incidents, not this strange limbo. I'd tried to check on Ryan's condition, but the medical staff claimed they had no information. Their evasive answers and averted eyes told me more than their words did. The summons came via a stern-faced lieutenant who appeared at our barracks door just after sunrise. "Sergeant Thompson, your presence is required in briefing room C at 0800 hours. Your team as well." He left before I could ask questions. James looked over at me from where he sat cleaning his weapon, a nervous habit he'd developed years ago. "What do you think this is about?" he asked quietly. "Official story time," I replied. "They've had enough hours to come up with one." Robert and Christopher exchanged glances but said nothing. The tension had built between us since our return, no one wanting to discuss what we'd seen, yet unable to think about anything else. At exactly 8 o'clock, we filed into briefing room C, a small, windowless space with a single table and 6 chairs. The walls were bare except for a faded map of Iraq and a clock that ticked too loudly in the silence. Colonel Thomas Anderson waited for us, standing at the head of the table with his hands clasped behind his back. I'd known Anderson for 3 years, a career military man who followed rules to the letter and expected the same from those under his command. His face betrayed nothing as we entered and took our seats. "Gentlemen," he began once we were settled, "I'll keep this brief." He placed a manila folder on the table and opened it, though he didn't look at its contents. Whatever he was about to tell us, he didn't need notes. At 0317 this morning, Specialist Ryan Sanderson was pronounced dead at the medical facility. Cause of death has been determined to be sudden cardiac arrest. The words hit me like a physical blow. I heard James inhale sharply beside me, while Robert mumbled something that might have been a prayer. "That's not possible," I said, leaning forward in my chair. Ryan was 24 years old. No history of heart problems. Anderson's eyes met mine. "Combat stress affects the body in unpredictable ways, Sergeant. The medical report is quite clear." "Sir, with all due respect, what happened to Ryan wasn't stress. He saw something in that box. Something that—" "The medical report," Anderson cut me off, "is final, as is the official account of your mission." He pulled 4 identical documents from his folder and slid them across the table to each of us. "These are non-disclosure agreements. They classify your mission and all related events under Section 7 of National Security Protocols. By signing, you acknowledge that you will not discuss any aspect of the mission with anyone outside this room. This includes other military personnel, medical staff, family members, or civilians." Christopher picked up his copy, scanning the dense legal text. "What's Section 7, sir?" "Information deemed too sensitive for standard classification," Anderson replied. "Disclosure of any kind would result in immediate court-martial and federal charges." James didn't hesitate. He reached for a pen from the center of the table and signed his name on the indicated line. Robert followed suit after a moment's pause. Christopher looked at me questioningly, then turned back to the document before adding his signature as well. I left mine untouched on the table. "Is there a problem, Sergeant Thompson?" Anderson asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Ryan is dead. Elena Rodriguez is missing. We found a village filled with human teeth and a box that contained something that shouldn't exist. And now we're being told to pretend none of it happened." Anderson's expression didn't change, but his posture stiffened slightly. "Some discoveries," he said slowly, "are too dangerous for public knowledge. Our duty extends beyond combat, Sergeant. Sometimes it includes protecting civilians from information that would cause widespread panic." "What about Elena Rodriguez?" I asked. "Did your team find her?" The woman was never found. Given the desert conditions and lack of water, she is presumed dead. Another lie. I'd seen how Elena moved, with impossible speed and precision. She wasn't just some local woman who would die in the desert. And the box? Destroyed, for safety reasons. I knew he was lying about that too. No military or intelligence agency would destroy an unknown object before studying it thoroughly, especially one with such dramatic effects. So that's it? Ryan died of natural causes, the woman vanished, the box was destroyed, and we all go back to our regular duties? Not quite, Anderson replied. All 4 of you will be reassigned to different units within the week. New orders are being processed. And there it was, the final piece of the cover-up. Separate us, send us far from each other and anyone who might ask questions about what happened in that village. I picked up the pen, weighing it in my hand. I'd spent over a decade in military service, following orders, trusting the chain of command. But this felt different. This felt wrong in ways I couldn't fully articulate. "Sign the document, Sergeant," Anderson said, not quite making it an order, but close. I signed my name, knowing my signature meant nothing compared to what I'd seen. No document could erase the memory of that village, those teeth, what was inside that box. No threat of court-martial could make me truly forget. Anderson collected the signed forms, returning them to his folder with practiced efficiency. "This matter is now closed," he said. "You'll receive your new assignments within 48 hours. Until then, you're restricted to base. Dismissed." We stood and filed out of the room. None of us spoke as we walked back to the barracks. What was there to say? Our experiences had been officially erased. Ryan was dead, and soon we'd all be separated, sent to different corners of the world to ensure this secret stayed buried. Back in our quarters, James finally broke the silence. "It's probably for the best," he said quietly. "Some things, maybe they shouldn't be talked about." I looked at him, this man I'd trusted with my life countless times in combat, and saw genuine relief in his eyes. He wanted to forget. Maybe that was the sane response. Christopher sat on his bunk, staring at his hands. "Do you think they're really sending us away from each other on purpose?" "Yes," I answered without hesitation. "Can't have us comparing notes or asking questions." "What questions?" Robert asked from across the room. "It's over. Ryan's gone. We've got our orders." But it wasn't over. Not for me. The image of what I'd glimpsed in that box remained burned into my memory. Impossible geometry, colors that hurt to perceive. And somewhere out there was Elena Rodriguez, moving with unnatural speed, perhaps still carrying teeth in her blood-stained hands. I lay back on my bunk and closed my eyes, not expecting sleep, but needing a moment of darkness. Anderson had lied about multiple details, and I had no doubt that what we'd experienced in that village was being buried under layers of classification and denial. Within the week, we'd all be scattered to the winds, carrying our silence and our nightmares to separate corners of the world, and the truth about what happened in that village would disappear like teeth sifted through fingers. I folded my uniforms with mechanical precision, arranging them in my duffel bag just as I'd been taught in basic training years ago. My hands moved through the motions automatically while my mind remained stuck in that village. The room felt emptier with Ryan's bunk stripped bare. His death certificate might have said cardiac arrest, but I knew better. Ryan died the moment he opened that box. The transfer orders had arrived under my door sometime during the night, a single sheet of paper that would send me halfway across the world. 8th Infantry Division, Germany, effective immediately. Transport departing at 1600 hours. James sat on his bunk across from me, his own papers clutched in his hand. "Afghanistan," he said quietly. "Forward operating base near Kandahar." I nodded, not surprised. "Robert and Christopher?" "Fort Lewis, Washington for Robert. Christopher's heading to Fort Drum, New York. As far apart as possible while still keeping us on the payroll." The message couldn't have been clearer if Anderson had spelled it out. "It's happening fast," James observed, folding his own orders and tucking them into his pocket. "Thought we'd have a few days at least. They want us gone before we start asking more questions." James looked up sharply. "Don't, Dave, just don't. Ryan's dead, let it go." I zipped my bag closed with more force than necessary. "You really think this is a coincidence? That they're splitting us up this quickly for operational reasons?" "What I think," James said, lowering his voice, "is that we signed those papers for a reason. I've got 8 years until retirement. I'm not throwing that away, chasing something that—" He trailed off, looking around as if someone might be listening. Maybe someone was. The thought had crossed my mind more than once since our return. I finished packing in silence. Part of me understood James's position. He had a wife back home, a baby on the way. His life had a clear path forward. Mine had always been the military, following orders, serving my country. But after what we'd seen, those certainties felt hollow. The mess hall was nearly empty when I arrived for lunch. I filled my tray with food I didn't want and found a table in the corner, my back to the wall out of long-established habit. James had gone to make some calls before his departure. Robert and Christopher were already processing out. Our team was dissolving exactly as planned. 2 men in civilian clothes entered the mess hall, taking seats at a table near mine. I recognized them immediately as the type: intelligence officers who wore civilian attire on base to maintain deniability. They spoke quietly, but in the near-empty room, fragments of their conversation carried to where I sat. "Third case this year," the older one said, stirring his coffee without drinking it. "First Iraq, now Syria." "Pattern's different, though," replied the younger man, his back to me. "Syria had no teeth, just personal belongings arranged in concentric circles. Whole town empty." I kept my eyes on my food, carefully controlling my expression while my pulse quickened. Another incident, different but similar enough. Both sites quarantined. Level 7, full containment. The Syria team reported visual distortions at the perimeter. The older man nodded. "Same as the others, then. Makes you wonder how many more." He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes flickering over his companion's shoulder to where I sat. I took a bite of food, chewing slowly, trying to appear disinterested. "Let's continue this elsewhere," he said, standing abruptly. They left, their trays barely touched. I remained at my table, processing what I'd heard. Level 7 containment. Other sites. Visual distortions. The pieces suggested a pattern beyond just our village. Something systematic and deliberately hidden. By 1400 hours, I had completed all checkout procedures and stood at the edge of the base with my duffel bag, waiting for the transport to the airport. The bright afternoon sun did nothing to warm the chill that had settled inside me. I hadn't seen James, Robert, or Christopher since morning. Our goodbyes had been brief, awkward. Men who had faced death together, now separated by secrets we weren't supposed to discuss. The ride to the airport passed in silence. I watched the Iraqi landscape roll by outside the armored vehicle's window, wondering if Elena Rodriguez was still out there somewhere. At the airport, military personnel directed me to a waiting area for troops in transit. My flight wouldn't depart for another 3 hours. I sat among other soldiers heading home or to new assignments, their conversations and laughter creating a bubble of normalcy that felt alien after what I'd experienced. I spotted a small bank of computers labeled Internet Access in the corner of the waiting area. After a moment's hesitation, I walked over and sat at one of the terminals. The search engine page blinked at me, cursor waiting. What exactly was I looking for? The symbols on the box had been unlike any language I'd ever seen, curves and angles that seemed to shift when viewed directly. But they had to come from somewhere. I typed, "Ancient symbols, Middle East unknown language." Pages of academic articles appeared. I clicked through them, scanning quickly, finding nothing that matched what I'd seen. I tried different search terms: mysterious archaeological symbols, undeciphered writing systems, Mesopotamian unknown artifacts. Nothing matched. Hours passed as I went deeper, finding references to Sumerian cuneiform, Proto-Sinaitic script, obscure hieroglyphic systems, but nothing that captured the wrongness of the symbols on that box. Then I tried a different approach: classified military discoveries, archaeological sites. Most results were conspiracy theories or declassified files from decades ago. But one link caught my attention: a partially redacted military report about anomalous discoveries in northern Iraq from 2003. The document had been released through a Freedom of Information request but was mostly blacked out. What remained mentioned unusual artifacts and unidentifiable writing that defied conventional linguistic analysis. I followed the digital breadcrumbs, finding more redacted documents mentioning similar incidents across the Middle East and North Africa. The reports spanned decades, each heavily censored, but the pattern was clear. The military had encountered these phenomena before, multiple times, and buried each occurrence under layers of classification. Your flight to Frankfurt is now boarding at Gate C7. The announcement pulled me from my research. I looked up, suddenly aware of how much time had passed. I cleared the browser history, logged out, and gathered my belongings. As I walked toward the gate, my mind sifted through what I'd learned. Not enough for answers, but enough to confirm my suspicions. What happened in that village wasn't unique. It had happened before, would happen again, and each time would be hidden away by people like Anderson. I handed my boarding pass to the attendant and walked down the jet bridge. Finding my seat, I stowed my carry-on and buckled in, watching other passengers file past, civilians heading home, soldiers to new assignments, all of them wonderfully ignorant of boxes with impossible contents and villages filled with teeth. The plane began to taxi, and I leaned my head against the window. 10 years of military service had taught me to follow orders, to trust in the system and the chain of command. But the past 48 hours had taught me something else, that some truths were buried not to protect national security, but because they threatened our understanding of reality itself. The image from inside the box flashed in my memory again, those shapes and colors that shouldn't exist, that seemed to reach without moving and speak without sound. My mind still recoiled from the memory, unable to process what I'd seen. Perhaps that was why they buried such incidents. Some discoveries didn't fit into our ordered world of military protocol and rational explanation. As the plane lifted off, carrying me away from Iraq and the village and Elena Rodriguez, I accepted that I would never receive official answers. The files would remain redacted, the incidents classified, the witnesses separated. But acceptance didn't mean forgetting. The village of teeth would stay with me, a splinter in my mind that would never work its way out. And somewhere in the world, other soldiers would stumble upon other impossibilities, see things they shouldn't see, and learn the same lesson I had, that some orders existed to protect secrets that shouldn't exist at all.